Don't you right? It's don't you right? Yeah. Or it's not on. Hello? No. Oh, it's on. Oh, okay. Okay, that's a bit embarrassing if that was live stream. Okay. Okay. Yeah. The line between sexualization and self-liberated sexualization is one that is very thin. So the world in which they live in is a world that cannot tell a difference between so. And the point in which we make that difference is the point in which we own up to it and the point in which we consent into that sexual liberalization of individuals and of ourselves. The problem that we have within today's debate is understanding that sexualization is something that we can never completely take away within this world. Now, I'll elaborate that much more to you in my speech. So even the most liberal of societies, even if you are a supporter of the feminist movement and you are inherently very liberal and you support the sexualization of women of themselves, you will still see billboards and you will still see media in which will feed you the doctrine and will still show you that individuals of which you will still have sexualized them, even if you are the most liberated person as a whole. It is horrible that we live in a world that cannot take away absolutely that form of sexualization, but we think the opt-out mechanism is one that we can have better under our side of the house. Our stance is simple. We want a world in which sexualization becomes a norm, and the ability for people to easily opt into that form of sexualization for themselves and never be shamed of it is one that we support as a whole. Sit down. Why is sexualization never one that can be completely overcome in the society that we live in? We think it's a mental factor. So you are obviously, as any other individual, you are attracted towards attractive people, and you will feel certain form of emotions when you see individuals without dressing. So when you see a more sexier person than the other, we think the point in which we realize that sexualization is one that you can never directly take away, and it's not only a form that women get. If anything, we want to make it a point in which people can allow to be owned up to it, because when you make it a norm within society and you have individuals, that is not only women now getting that form of getting that idea that sexualization is a women thing. We think that sexualization factor is a self-preserving factor that you can have for yourself, and the point in which you opt into it yourself is the point in which we support it. So sure, obviously under our side of the house, we don't support other people forcing you to sexualize yourself. If anything, we still support the side that is sexually liberated, but for yourself as a whole. Sure. Exactly. So your side of the house is the side that will have those certain standards of what is a very sexual African American. Our side of the house is the side that will allow every individual to self-sexualize of yourself, and you have different images of how men see themselves as beautiful, but they still opt into the sexualization, because beauty and the fact that you want to self-sexualize yourself and the platform to do so is the point in which other individuals can also opt into the mechanism, can also be proud of themselves, and it's not something you can then be ashamed about. But secondly, when you see other individuals sexualizing other individuals, we think it's very hard for you to opt out of that world. Therefore, we think completely taking out that sexualization factor under their side of the house is one that is, if not impossible, extremely, extremely hard to do. First argument, how does sexualization function inherently, right? First level, we think individuals want to make themselves more desirable to others, and the factor of sexualization is an of itself. In status quo, we think there is a form of discrimination towards the majority of women, and is seen as a form of discrimination, particularly to only one form of gender. We think the point in which you only highlight that, and you do not support the rise of this industry, number one, the industry will exist either way, but the point in which you are a feminist that does not support this rise is the point in which you also realize that sexualization is a problem that you're not willing to stand for the side of men. So for the side of men that choose to also want to come. So in the case of which it is Hooters, you're willing to support the self-sexualization of women in prostitution, but you're not willing to support the idea of men wanting to sexualize themselves. If anything, it still harms the ability for individuals or for women specifically to also self-liberalize their sexuality in comparison to yours. So even in the worst case scenario, under your side of the house, even if you take away this platform or you do not support that rise, if anything, your side of the house also takes away the ability for women or the ability for individuals to accept the self-sexualization of women within society under your side of the house. But secondly, why is it extremely different? Because the point in which you consent towards that sexualization is the point in which we will support you. And the feminist movement have always been supporting individuals. They will self-sexualize or self-liberate themselves at the end of the day. Because the point in which you don't support this is inherent, principally contradictory towards the feminist movement and how we support the sexualization for both genders as a whole. But thirdly, what is the comparative analysis? Their side of the house is the side of the house that sure, may be able to tackle sexualization, create laws, create outright laws that will take away sexualization, but those insidious discrimination or those mental factors that you cannot change under your side of the house, no matter what you do. So even if maybe you can do it in the next millennium, we don't think we will want women to suffer within status quo right now, nor do we want men to suffer within the status quo right now. So even if you can change that, it is a very long-term process we're not willing to wait for at the end of the day. Have a seat. If the comparative is that we are willing to do several things under our side, number one, we think the outcomes is severely more effective in comparison to theirs. Because when you make it not only a women's issue, but you make it a global issue between both genders, if anything, number one, individuals or within status quo can probably be able to analyze or can be able to connect with that issue even more. So meaning men within society, when they realize that the ability for women to self-sexualize themselves or the ability for myself to self-sexualize myself is understanding it is based upon consent. It's understanding that I shouldn't be able to sexualize another person if it is not based upon consent and the ability. So if the only problem under their side of the house was through that POI, meaning that under our side we would have standards upon which individuals are beautiful and which individuals are not. We don't think that standard exists under our side of the house. If anything, we break away that standard when we realize that sexualization is one that can exist under our side and it's a platform in which we give towards individuals and we will support you either way. Because what is the norm within society? If anything, we will argue to you, the norm within society is that if you self-sexualize yourself, if anything, you will be deemed as an individual that you cannot be proud of because it is not deemed as a norm. So if anything, you deter individuals from coming out and you deter individuals from actually wanting to self-actualize because it is deemed as not a norm. You can see individuals that want to come out from slut walks and be proud of their sexual liberalization is one that you cannot be proud of as much under your side because you don't make it a norm. If anything, you make it upon a gender base. If any woman does it within status quo, you discriminate that women at the end of the day. The comparative is much better under our side. So sure, we will not tell you we will attain that sexualization or that beautiful utopia under our side of the house, but we think the better trade-off that we make under our side is that we support the rise of these industries and we also support the rise of female actors coming out based upon consent to self-sexualize themselves at the end of the day. The world that we live in is a world that cannot be perfect and sexualization will inherently exist. But the trade-off that we will make is a trade-off that will willingly exist upon both paradigms to allow an equal platform of self-sexualization, and the point in which we allow that self-sexualization between individuals is the point in which we would allow a world that will not only target women as a form of sexualization factor, but will allow a platform upon individuals, regardless if you're a woman or a man, to come out and you are proud of yourself to be a sexual factor, then you can do so under our side of the house. We're supremely proud to propose.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. The link that was missing from side government was the link between the objectification of males and the apparent change in the way in which we view ourselves as individuals, because we never understood why objectifying males the same way women are objectified suddenly creates some form of self-liberation for women as well as males. Because it was recognized by the Prime Minister in this speech when she said that side opposition can never solve sexualization. It might be true that we won't have that ability, but that statement alone recognizes that there's so many problems with sexualization that so many people aren't included within the scope of acceptability in status quo that even their side can't protect. African American women, plus-sized women, women who are Muslim aren't accepted under your paradigm under sexual liberation. We don't see how implementing the same standards to males suddenly creates any form of self-appreciation, if not controlled by your media and your corporate interests, which you cannot regulate under your paradigm. If we are purchasing products and services that have been sold to us out of the sole purpose of increasing the amount of income for a company, we don't see how the sexual standards of acceptability are going to apply to a wide range of individuals. All my rebuttals will be integrated. Sit down. So what is the policy from side opposition? We reject objectification and any method of over-sexualization to both genders. It might be hard in today's world, but as far as possible, we'd use our clout to boycott your male hooters. We'd even boycott advertisements that over-sexualize women, even the hooters in status quo. We think feminists should not opt in to these services for both genders. But secondly, we wouldn't use any of our ability to inflict harm on the opposite gender, even if to some extent it allows them to feel the same amount of sexualization. So I'm going to make two arguments. Firstly, why is male objectification horrible? Why is it not self-liberation? But secondly, why female objectification becomes far worse under side government. Sit down. Why is male objectification horrible? I really do sympathize with women through the decades of disenfranchisement, the sexually objectified, to the gender roles that women are consistently placed in. We understand that these are horrible standards that individuals might not be able to opt out of. But we do not think a morally evil action is necessary or will help women in general in any circumstance. What does this policy do? Have a seat. Firstly, it sets equal standards of male acceptance even within our society. We think it enforces gender roles and gender acceptance on a pretty limited scale, considering it's enforced by corporate interests. So when your media companies and your companies that are selling products exclusively to males, by selling them on the sexualization of women, that is the same thing that is likely to happen under our circumstance, because the consumer base now is women, and there'll be a continuous sexualization as to what is deemed to be acceptable within status quo, what is desirable. These aren't things that you can regulate. You can't tell us you would adopt males and let males work under these circumstances if they don't fit the desirability of women, the same way the consumer base of male is regulated by corporate interests. Have a seat. Why is this harmful? Firstly, many men are likely to face the same level of discrimination. Men who are not strong, men who are not tall, men who are not Caucasian. These are all gender binary harms that your side inflicts on these individuals. But secondly, the over-sexualization of males reduces their agency and ability to increase their quality of life. In status quo, the quality of life of a woman is judged by the length of a skirt. That is likely to apply under your paradigm as well, when males are likely to be rejected of job opportunities, because there's also an understanding that sexualization plays an important role in how successful you will be as an individual. We understand that these are harms that might happen in status quo with some semblances of sexualization of male, but your side makes it worse. Thirdly, we think you further affect homonormativity. So the sexualization of females and males doesn't only affect men and women. It affects every other individual in between, or every individual that doesn't want to associate themselves with those two groups of individuals. Sit down. What do I mean? Even within the LGBT community, homonormativity is the adoption of heterosexual ideals into homosexual relationships. And within homosexual relationships, the perfect man is also seen to be the man who is muscular, is also seen to be the man who is the individual that can stand up for himself and is a very dominant male in his public presentation and even in his sexual encounters as an individual. The same way female objectification affects every other person that could be visually seen to be a female but doesn't want to identify themselves within that community, you would also affect gay individuals who choose to not bind themselves into your gender stereotypes, even if they weren't the same people that were the ones who victim blamed your women, and they were the same people that made lives horrible for women under your paradigm. Sure.
So under both sides, people will already have their preferences towards people who are big and strong. Which side points it out once we only sexualize one particular race or one particular gender normativity? When is it that people will realize that this is happening and I should fight for myself to be more?
So come, let me tell you what a scale is. In status quo, it might already happen. Some males might be forced into these gender stereotypes. The point at which you continue buying these products, you further enforce it. You made an argument in your POI to tell me that it's harmful, but you also continue to tell me why you should embrace it and somehow make it better, which your Prime Minister hasn't already proven. Fourthly, what about sexual violence? We think sexual violence is an extremely pernicious harm that exists within the male community. A man is needed to be strong. A man is needed to suck it up when he's sexually harassed by a woman within your male hooters or within your male cafes, the point at which he speaks up about rape, he's likely to be laughed about by all his friends and all his acquaintances. These are individuals that are going to internalize all the possible harms that could happen towards them. And the point at which we don't have an understanding of this, we won't increase the amount of attention towards it. You will have more male rapes under your paradigm because you put more males in these positions of male sexuality selling as a service. You have more individuals that are likely to be harassed in your services, and we don't think that you can regulate. You make males feel worse and you don't allow them to stand up about it. Secondly, the second argument, why does female objectification become worse? These things can be analyzed under twofold. Firstly, structurally and socially. Structurally, we think the consumer base of female sexualization does not change. We think the male consumer base of buying female sexual items, all the things that you use and you attach sexuality to, cars, etc. We think these are all things that are still going to happen. The only change now is that companies are just going to amp up over-sexualization, because previously they got so much flack for sexualizing women. Now there is no border, there is no barrier to continue to sexualize women on the ground. They'll get more thinner models, they'll get individuals that are less diverse in general, because under your paradigm, it was accepted on males. There is nothing to criticize under our situation. But when it comes to socially, males are the individuals that will call feminists contradictory. They'll continue to slut-shame individuals, they'll continue to objectify them, because your movement implemented the same standards on me and limited my ability to enjoy my life as an individual.
Yeah. There's a thin line drawn between sexualization and sexual liberation. And here's the main part of the Prime Minister's speech in which Kishan significantly missed out. Because clearly from the 3 minutes of Kimberly's explanation, she told you clearly, when a certain gender or a certain community is forced to be upheld to certain standards in which defines whether they are beautiful or not, that is discrimination. But when both genders or when both communities are subjected to the same sort of standards, the platform now becomes fair. The platform now becomes open to its discourse because individuals are able to consent into that very act of liberation. Individuals are much more able to have the liberty to have discourse towards it. Individuals are able to own the idea of sexual liberation, which would otherwise never have existed under their side. Why do we say so? Because let's analyze what they told us. Here's my first issue. There's an unfair sexualization towards one gender only. Oh, but before that, right, rebuttals will all be integrated with substantive material. Right, first issue is that there's an unfair sexualization towards a particular gender already. Because we felt that they clearly missed out on a big characterization on how the society functions in status quo. Is that the people in society constantly defines how a beautiful woman should be. That a woman should only be skinny, that a woman should only have big boobs and big butts, and etc. Right? All of these are direct sexualization towards women, which is discriminatory, the point in which only males have the ability to subject women to these sorts of standards. Which means, even if a woman upholds the identity of sexual liberation, she's unable to actively voice out and unable to actively live her identity as a slut, because the point in which she comes out of the closet saying that she's a slut, she's upheld towards all of these social standards and all of these objectifications that are set by the male gender. But the point in which, let's draw a comparison, right? When females also have the same ability to sexualize males, when females also have the same dominant capacity in order to impose all sorts of these standards upon males also, we think it allows a better platform for individuals to say that, look, it might not necessarily be a bad thing. Sit down. Why do we say so? Because the point in which individuals are normal towards it, it becomes a norm. It becomes, the process of normalization happens, which means we allow individuals to explore certain preferences in which might not actually happen under side opposition. The point in which sexualization happens towards both communities as a whole, it opens up a bigger form and a bigger platform for individuals to be able to have discourse towards it, right? And there are also many reasons why females should be able to do so, right? Simply because due to the historical sexualization in which females have been subjected towards sexualization, we think it's extremely justified in a case in which these are individuals who want to defend themselves. But secondly, on the issue, right, of over-sexualization and stereotypes, which we think happens even worse under their side. Why do we say so, right? Because when you sexualize something, when you objectify something, individuals are set towards certain definitions and certain standards as to which how you should present yourself towards society, right? But the point in which it becomes a norm, that norm should be a norm that covers the vast majority of preferences in which how individuals would like their partner to be. Which means when sexualization becomes a norm in society, discourse is more likely to happen as to why certain individuals and certain criteria defines how an individual, how beautiful an individual is, right? But the point in which it becomes a norm, it allows individuals to actually expand this skill of sexualization as a whole. Why do we say so, right? It's because when companies only, use skinny models or macho men as a whole, right? We don't think those preferences cover every single preference in society. But the point in which it becomes normal, it allows individuals to actively voice out. Why is my preference not covered? I like thick women. I like skinnier men. I like more, more feminine men as a whole. Why are these preferences not taken into account? And that can never ever happen under your side. Because under your side, because under their side, right, what happens is that individuals will constantly discriminate, and these are people who are unable to own up to that very sexualization as a whole, right? Because the point in which individuals are only discriminated and there is no leeway for them to actually empower themselves through a process of owning the very idea of being sexualized, all of this discourse will never ever happen. Because current status quo proves that there are progress, especially when it comes to acknowledging females as a whole, right? When more artists like Meghan Trainor, who are thicker and who are significantly larger in size, are actively recognized in society, this is a process in which sexualization of men actively happens in society. But we don't think that actually happens under their side. Because acceptance never actually comes into play under their side when only one community and one gender is subjected towards all those discrimination. It's more strategic for you to say that when you subject both genders into in the same form of discrimination, that a discourse only will happen, right? Because if it's true that it's as bad as they are, if it's as bad as what they want to talk about, then it's also much more reasonable to say that the male community would actively voice out, why are you actively sexualizing me? Why are you actively objectifying me? As opposed to a point in which there is a power imbalance that only males can sexualize females, and females are unable to actually have a protectionist policies to protect them from all these sorts of discriminations. It's more strategic for the feminist movement as a whole. It's more strategic for the acceptance of a spectrum of identities. But before I move on, go Kishan.
Just to be clear, the position of side government is that both genders should discriminate each other and hold each other to standards they cannot achieve to generate some form of discourse that hasn't already helped women.
Yeah, the discourse in status quo is lacking. Sure, you can go with all their policies of boycotting and etc., but we don't think that actually gives a significant progress in status quo. Because it's simply because it's only one community that are being held to those standards of sexualization. And the point in which these individuals are discriminated, they are unable to own the idea of sexualization, which is the idea of sexual liberation as a whole. But the point in which both communities are subjected to the same form of standards, individuals are more likely to have a discourse upon preferences. Because if it's true that it's as bad as what they say, then individuals are more likely to actually question corporations and actually question those lobby groups as to why only certain beauty standards are accepted, as to why only certain criteria of beauties are accepted, in which will never actually happen under their side. So the comparison here is this, that under their side, it's more likely that females will be sexualized because these are individuals who are unable to actually say that sexualization is a good thing. But when we subject both genders towards sexualization, it's more likely to say that the female will say, look, since you are being sexualized also, that is not necessarily a bad thing. Discourse happens, more expansion of preferences happens. We think that's the more strategic way for the feminist movement to go. Thank you.
by actively supporting a world where more people are unable to subscribe to happiness and beauty, we think side government is complicit in the perpetuation of evil. We recognize and we agree that the world is bad, but we should not make it worse. For everyone out there who is a victim, for everyone out there who has been exposed to years of discrimination, these are the individuals that we need to care for. And making life harder for them will also make it harder for them to ever be able to fully be happy and satisfied with themselves. In my speech today, I'm going to ask a number of questions to deal with team government, and all substantives will be integrated. So the first question, sexual objectification versus sexual liberation, which is better? So the logic here was, the only way you can feel sexually liberated is when you even the playing field. The reason why women aren't able to opt into sexual liberation now is that men are overwhelmingly more powerful in this aspect. But here's why we don't agree with this. We think that you simply allow evil to exist on both sides, because they build up a very strong case as to why sexualization is evil. Therefore, regardless of whether or not you want to even the playing fields, we think sexualization in either hands of either party means you're going to entrench the evil sorts of things that people are going to be exposed to. What does this mean? We think that less people are simply going to be able to opt into beauty, because if you concede that you want this to be as marketable as possible, so the most amount of people have access to it, then we're going to use the standards that we've used in the past to make sure it's marketable. We're going to market it to our white consumer audience who has the most amount of money. This means you're going to have less inclusion of African Americans. You're going to have a lot more people who internalize hatred, who are forced to go through trauma, or even if you make it much more acceptable, you increase the types of rapes that happen, and you have a lot less discussion on it. So here's what you do. We say that if an evil makes a person sad, regardless of his gender, you should not opt into that because it is evil. We recognize that you are also victims, but creating much more victims in this world only increases the net amount of suffering that the person is forced to go through. And that is immoral, that is not principally correct. But here's the even if. We think that even if you even the playing field or give women some form of authority, corporations are simply going to amp up on counter-sexualization. So if before this, the only barrier a corporation had was the fact that he knew that he was going to get flack from the female and possibly male community because they had the victim cards, the point at which you remove the victim card from the female community because they are also seen as being evil and making more men go through horrible experiences, we will simply make a norm that isn't accessible to women. So if in your world you agree that sexualization is the reason why women aren't happy with themselves, when you have a lot more of that sexualization by corporations, then that norm becomes a lot less accessible to a lot more women. We say African American women, people who aren't conventionally attractive, cannot opt in, and that's when even if you even the playing field, it will only be accessible to individuals who are already privileged. We're talking about white people, we're talking about people who are tall, and they are the victims that need help the most in our world today. But the second part of this question, will we have more inclusion or preferences? We say that preferences are decided by the industry. So you're sexualizing based on what's most profitable, based on the structures we already have. We think you only make it worse. But here's when you have less discussion. We think you have less of a proper or conducive discussion when you victimize more men. Because the only thing you're going to do is amp up on exclusive standards. So you're going to use their privilege to continue subjugating more women. If you can see that the world is run by men, if the world and the media is owned by men, they can simply put much more money than the woman can into making sure that women feel worse about themselves. So the point at which you victimize individuals who are already attacking you, they're simply going to amp up on the ways that they can attack you. If women are denied jobs today because they aren't as sexy, they'll do that even more. And you're going to have a lot less reporting by male peers who will represent the biggest part of that office because they simply don't care. The point at which they were also made victims by your policy. Even if you have a lot more preferences, we think the market is much more smaller for these sorts of preferences. So these are the individuals that will always feel left out anyways in your world. But before that, yes.
How is that not the status quo that we're talking about, in which all females or most females are already hung up to all those discriminatory policies that you want to knock out?
So we say that yes, it happens in the status quo, but it could happen a lot worse. The point at which you also objectify men, then all the emotional harms that women go through will also be gone through by men. And if you agree that this is an awful harm that's life-changing, this means men are never going to be able to opt out of that suffering. But the point at which corporations now have an active incentive to also amp up on that discrimination, this means that these same harms will also be made a lot worse. The point at which the media is crowded out with a lot more advertisements that sexualize women, with a lot more shows that only employ white, tall women who are seen to be conventionally beautiful. That's when you make life that much more worse. And here's why you won't have your sexual liberation. Because as the market becomes that much more pervasive, we think you cannot opt out. This means that you are forced to see these same advertisements and standards every day, and you will try your best to opt into such standards that you know are impossible to opt into. That's when you'll see more African Americans trying to bleach their skin. That's when you'll see more Indians trying to make their hair straight, trying to run away from their origins and their roots, because they are ashamed to be part of a culture which you deem as not being beautiful. If anything, we think you make the world much worse for people who cannot opt in. But the second question, or the second issue, should we support this as a feminist? No, thank you. We think that feminists should not support evil, and this is also about the argument. Here's why. Because you're going to lose a lot more clout that you could have otherwise had to make the fight much better. Why do you make it worse? We think that if we agree men are the most powerful, you lose the victim card in your world, and that's when you'll have less social traction. So the point at which you're able to use media to galvanize more individuals to opt into your fight, the people who can actually make a change won't opt into that fight. And this means men who were previously moderates, who would have believed that they could have had some help in making sure the individuals who are victims are made to be less of victims. No, thank you. In your world, you're going to lose people who are extremely powerful that could lend a lot more influence to making sure that that there are less advertisements that are sexual, that there are less shows that prey on our vulnerabilities. What happens then instead is you push over these individuals to the opposing side that makes your fight that much more worse. But two, we think that the discussion itself becomes that much more insensitive. So if I'm a victim as well, the way I'm going to respond to you telling me that I'm a bigot is saying that you do it as well. We're going to increase slut shaming. We're going to increase body shaming. We're going to increase shaming in any way we can, because we think it's a legitimate way for us to counter arguments, the point in which that is the manner in which you want to achieve sexual liberation. So if anything, what you're telling society is to sexually liberate people, you need to do as much as you can to make them feel worse about themselves. Because the point at which everyone feels awful, that's when everyone can at least be happy together. But that's not true. Because when we're all feeling awful together, that means we will all not be able to achieve some form of society cohesiveness, or we make sure we adhere to the most amount of preferences that everyone can have. We simply stop caring about these preferences. We simply stop caring about what you want, because what you want will result in me getting harmed, will result in me getting body shamed as well. You only segregate the fight and make it that much more sectionalized, and we think that's when you make the fight for feminism and equality that much harder to achieve.
The side of opposition today has assumed a lot of things that we said. Firstly, let's get things clear. We are okay with sexualization, the point at which both sides can do it, right? We think sexualization is only bad when in the end it's a form of discrimination. Because if a woman sexualizes a man, in these instances, the woman is called a slut. But when a woman is being sexualized, there's nothing wrong with that, right? We think that a clear problem in today's debate is that in these circumstances, we think that it's time that women also own up and become on the same par as men. Because it is unfair to a woman who wants to be sexualized. Obviously, she wants to sexualize other people also. She will never have that opportunity. It is discrimination for your side to only allow sexualization for only one party. Under your side, it's horrible for you to do that. Two issues. Number one, stereotypes. Number two, sexualization. Firstly, let's deal with their stereotypes. Because they say that under our side, we'll entrench stereotypes of what it means to be beautiful, and we'll set standards of what it is. That will happen under both sides, right? The difference is this, right? Because under your side, we all have our preferences already. Meaning that under your side, all the preferences are not visible to people. So the people who are deemed not beautiful under your side will never know that they are not deemed beautiful. What does this mean? That you'll always have to go through things where they will not get dated, or where they won't get swipe right on Tinder, or whatever it means to say you're good on Tinder, right? This means that these women will always be denied jobs because of they're not sexy enough. This means men who aren't muscular will always be discriminated under your side. The harm is these people do not know about it, right? And this is why it was important from Ryan's speech, where we say that under our side, we know about that these things are happening. So let's just say under our worst case scenario, over-sexualization of men happens, and it's all white, tall men who are extremely muscular. It's at this point that we realize that these are the general norms of society already, right? So that means that under our side, even if it becomes worse, the difference is we know about it and we can actually take steps to fix it, right? And that's why it is important for our side to do that. Because once this happens, we can realize that, okay, these particular things are abandoned, right? These particular forms aren't really that wanted, this means that we'll pressure more corporations to ask and question them, why are you only doing these particular races? Why not? How about us, right? What Sid said about this, in very like minusculely, is that he said that we'll only want to target the biggest amount of people, which is the straight white male or whatever, right? We think, right, that these people still have different preferences already, whether you're a rich person or you're a majority. This means, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, that, or whatever you want to be called, that that you are able to identify what is the problem and you'll be able to speak out of it, right? So that means that we can realize that there are a large number of people who like these particular types of sexual preference, right? And we think that people evolve, because last time we only sexualized women who are extremely skinny and have big boobs, right? But now we have evolved into accepting more thicker women, having plus size models and things like that. This can only happen once we realize that there are discrimination towards thick women, right? So that means that under our side, we solve the issue of stereotypes, because under your side, it will always happen. Under our side, we recognize that this is an issue and we start hitting corporations for following these stereotypes. That's when we start to realize that we need to take steps to fix it. That's when we'll have more discourse about it, right? So we think that the conclusion to this is simple. The stereotypes that exist will happen anyway, and it's only under our side we can recognize that it's an issue and try to have discourse to find out why it's true. But even if only male bars, there'll be white, straight, muscular men. We think that the point at which you know that there's also a fan base where we enjoy having like fat guys, or how we enjoy having African American guys, that's when other corporations who will open their own bars for these specific things and things like that. So under this particular point, we think that even if we can't break the stereotypes, we can include other people in this sexualization also, which is a benefit that can happen under our side. Sit down. Let's talk about sexualization, because the comparative is, under sexualization, only your side, only men can do it. They say that sexualization is an evil. We agree to a certain extent, but not that really, right? What do we mean by this? Sexualization is okay the point at which you consent to it, meaning that the males who consented towards this sexualization can be sexually liberated. The women who consent to it can be sexually liberated. What happens under our side is that now sexualization isn't a bad thing. So for a woman who wants to become sexualized, she cannot do it. She cannot do it anymore because she'll be called a slut. But now a woman can use this rhetoric saying that, well, males are also sexualizing themselves. So you don't make this a gender issue, you just make this like a normal thing, right? That I should be able to sexually identify myself as someone who is liberal, and that was the key nuance in Kim's speech that they didn't really deal with yet. Hopefully, we will do that, right? So this means, Madam Chair, that in these circumstances, when women are able to sexualize men also, that means that you include the sexualization for both sides. Why isn't this discrimination, and why isn't this an evil? Because now women are able to, number one, realize that this is something that has happened to us a lot, and now we can finally feel, and now men can also feel the same thing, right? This means that both sides have an equal playing field of equality, where these individuals can both feel sexy and be sexualized at the same time, and it's a norm, it's not a gender issue anymore. Any of you?
So many people don't consent to the sexualization of themselves. So the standards that you implement ensures that the people that are most sexy are likely to be successful in your world. For every man and woman that doesn't want to sexualize themselves, what is your norm content?
Yeah, so for the men and women who don't want to sexualize themselves, that's fine, right? Under our side, they are not affected, because when we sexualize people, that's when in the end, we make gender specific, like this, like stereotypes and things like that. That's when it expands, and that's when we help these people, right? Because these people feel insecure about themselves or things like that. That's when under our side, we are able to fix it through things like discourse, after you realize that this is an issue that's happened. But for the people who do not want to be sexualized, we think under our side, you do not need to include yourself in the sexualization, or you do not need to, like, you can just opt out of it or not opt into it in the first place, right? So under both sides, sexualization will happen. At least under our side, we do it. But let's just assume that everything they say is true, that sexualization is the worst thing in the world, and it's the worst thing in the world, and we need to deal with it, right? Under your side, you will never be able to deal with this thing, and you always have to settle in a world in which this will always happen continuously, and you cannot do anything about it. Under our side, if sexualization is the worst thing ever, we allow males to feel what you have put on to us for thousands and decades of years, right? Under our side is the point at which you realize that these are things that we have done towards our women, and these are the things and the magnitude of harms that we have done towards them. This means that under our side, even if sexualization leads to a lot of bad things, we think in the long term it's a better thing, thing, because that's when individuals realize that if sexualization really is a horrible thing, I am put through it, then I should not put other people through it. This means that people will only realize that they're doing something wrong and realize and feel bad about it once we feel the pain that other people have felt. So yes, even if it's such an evil and we were making people feel all the pain, that pain is beneficial because your side has to defend that pain going on for a long time, maybe forever, because your side does not deal with sexualization. At least under our side, we understand that this is a problem and we try to fix it under our side.
If the normalization of sexualization is what you want to achieve through the rise of these industries, the very idea of equality that you're propagating from these movements, or the very qualm of you propagating gender equality for both sexes, is the last thing that your movement is concerning the most. Because if the rise and approval of these industries is your modus operandi to grant equality for both sexes, I'm afraid you won't be able to achieve equality for both sexes, because it will then become a race to who can be able to disgrace and sexualize each other's sexes the most. My wish speech will be very simple. I'll be putting in my rebuttals in forms of issues. So firstly, on the issue of over-sexualization of individuals and this idea of discourse, because their biggest qualm was that the discourse currently isn't working towards the sexualization of women, and which I find pretty weird. So no, we don't think so. Let's analyze why the world we live in currently is very horrible, and how on their side they further propagate and insinuate the discrimination towards women. No thanks. So I think we can safely assume from under our side that the majority of men in status quo have the most control in institutions such as the media, for example, and that they are privileged because they were not the ones that were systematically oppressed decades ago. How does their side make it much more worse for women? Because we told you from the very get-go that you lose the influence of men, because they are now seen as victims and they are often victimized by the rise of these industries. Furthermore, you increase the objectification towards women, because then now it becomes justified for men. It becomes justified for men it becomes justified for men and the corporations to insinuate this type of discrimination, because by implementing ads that are overly sexualized towards women, because it is much more marketable. So we think that the harm becomes more amped up on their side, because women, no thank you, are more discriminated than they are currently right now through these industries. So in conclusion, the discussion of these issues becomes much more worse under their side, because there is a monopoly of power and influences in status quo that we can't deny. And because of this monopoly, women now currently have no chance of being able to fight back. And we don't think that the best bet of fighting back is by celebrating the rise of such industries, of such industries. So secondly, on this idea on whether this helps everyone sexualize themselves. But before that, I'll take one.
So why is it discrimination if I as a model want to sexualize myself and we put on billboards?
Yeah, okay. So it's discriminatory. Wait, what was your question again?
Why is it discriminatory if a woman who wants to showcase her body is sexualized?
So it's discriminatory towards other women because they aren't able to conform towards that type of standard of beauty that you are trying to propagate in status quo. That is why it's harmful. So this next issue on whether this helps everyone sexualize themselves, because the biggest end goal was that when men sexualize women and women sexualize men, and all the good discourse will suddenly be presentable, and that it is justified as women to sexualize them to pay it back. Firstly, I don't think this is better under their side, because in status quo there is a construct of happiness that you have to conform to the standard of beauty to only become happy. We think that if you don't conform to this social construct of what it means to be happy, you become less happy. And we think that the propagation of you that the perpetual implementation of such social construct by celebrating the rise of such industries, we don't think you make men more happier to become men. Because if I'm a person who is fat, I won't be happy because I would then have to conform to this type of standard of beauty in order to become happy. Also on this idea on how on their key nuance that it doesn't become a gender issue. Of course it becomes a gender issue because under their side, it becomes a race of disgrace. It becomes a battle of who will sexualize each race, on who will sexualize each sex the most at the very end of the day. So we think that the long-term benefit under your side is the worst benefit that you are trying to achieve because you only further promote the cycle of sexualization which will never end in your long-term scenario. But before that, yeah, sure.
You do realize that all the stereotypes that you talked about exist under your side and all the harms will still happen under your side, it's just people wouldn't know anything about it and can't do anything about it.
Sure. I think that the best case scenario right now is to also not celebrate the rise of these industries that also celebrate the male purchasing power towards women. I think that is the best bet that we can achieve from this side of the house. So on this issue of discourse, because they conveniently told us that suddenly corporations will listen to the voices of the people and there'll be a diversity in these types of industries. There'll be a diversity in the preferences of these industries based on the preferences of what people want. No, thank you. No. So we think that this is the last thing that will be happening under their side because I think we can assume that most companies are very self-interested and they only present ideas that are very marketable. So we think that the mainstream right now is the social construct of what it means to be beautiful, and that is as a man you would be very well built and you would have a beautifully constructed face. And we think that corporations right now will only deem to promote those types of norms, promote those types of standards instead of marketing what people prefer in the very get-go. So also, what makes you think that right now, corporations will then implement a more diverse type of industry, an industry that caters to the preferences of other individuals, when right now in status quo, there is only one type of there's only like one very generic type of industry, and that is the Hooters bar, where women become waitresses, and they are perceived as the most beautiful standard that there can be ever achieved. So we don't think that there would be a diversity in the types of industries that you try to insinuate, because the last thing that people want is an idea that isn't marketable and an idea that isn't mainstream. So we think that discourse will become not present, or will become absent under your side, because people have no interest in bringing up such ideas or such ideas towards the table. So we think that the over-sexualization of individuals becomes much more worse under their side, because they are trying to propagate that you can only become beautiful if you are conforming to that type of beauty standard that has already become the construct in the status quo. So we think that discourse also becomes worse under their side, because people have no interest to bring up ideas that aren't really presentable towards the debate. Thank you.
We only understood the stance of side government towards the later part of the debate, because we were in extreme shock of the burden in which side government wanted to take upon themselves. So I'm going to apologize now, Viha, for the extremely confusing debate that you had to go through. So to make it really easier, I'm going to ask two questions. Firstly, what is sexualization? How does it happen? Is it really a good thing? Did side government achieve all they wanted to do within this? Each analysis by analysis to prove why we don't know what they were thinking in this debate. But secondly, will male sexualization create some form of self-sexualization of liberation? Because this is the way in which they could have achieved all their benefits, because apparently when one gender does it, it's harmful. When two genders do it, it's okay. So what is sexualization? It is the painting of a person as a sexual object, void of choice, and it's usually used to sell a product or a person. Sexualization is harmful because it attaches a lot of harms towards a person who didn't consent towards sexualizing themselves. Rapes and sexual assault happen for sexualization because when someone wears something that is deemed sexual, they are usually inviting a crime, and they are usually people that asked for it. And this is something that side government would be fine with. Why is it so harmful? It's harmful because companies control sexualization. As a person, I would love it if every single person was happy with how they looked in our society, but it doesn't work like that. For every hooters that you have in your society, we never saw a diversification of sexual preferences that the third speaker of side government somehow wanted us to believe. There is no diversification. Companies control our ability to perceive what is acceptable in society and what isn't. This is why sexualization is harmful. And this is also why preferences that are sold are one-dimensional. Because the ideal image is one that is really hard to achieve. A woman who is tall, a woman who is skinny, a woman who is Caucasian, these are all things that are attached to products because it's extremely hard to attach yourself and imagine yourself in those circumstances. So you'd buy as many products as you want to achieve that ideal sexual image. And this is what corporate interests look like. This is why side government cannot fiat some form of diversification in our sexual imagery and in the way which we embrace sexualization. So given that, is it really bad right now? So I said scale like 5 times in my speech, and there was still a lack of understanding from side government. It is bad, guys. From here, we can go to here, when more women are rejected of opportunities, when women were apparently asking for it, when they continuously objectified males, when companies can just continue objectifying women, and all your male support is just lost because we have no respect for the women that got us into the same harm. Harms can become a whole lot worse, and men are likely to be victims of it. So this is where side government's case comes in. Will male sexualization create self-sexualization? So this, because somehow everyone is going to come together in a communal meeting and agree, you know what, I don't want to be sexualized. You don't want to be sexualized, so let's not sexualize each other, right, guys? So that isn't what is going to happen. What is more likely to happen is more males are going to objectify women under your paradigm. Women are going to continuously buy male sexualization, and that industry is going to be amped up as well. Your companies are going to be preying on the insecurities of both sexes and continue to manipulate and generalize individuals. There'll be more sexual violence for males and females, and males won't be able to voice it out because these are individuals that lose their manhood, the point at which they are victims of sexual crimes. Every other person who fits within the LGBTQIA movement and didn't agree to be a part of your conception of what is beautiful is also likely to be a victim. Thank you.
Let's try to look at this issue from this perspective. Because the whole of side opposition tried to prove to us one thing and one thing only. That sexualization, objectification of a particular gender is bad. But in the same breath, say that, oh, you know, women in status quo are also being objectified, and therefore we have many sorts of efforts, i.e. boycotts and etc. But clearly, from the Prime Minister's speech, we clearly told you, Madam Chair, that boycotts are insufficient, that this topic is not sexy enough to be talked about, and there is no substantial discourse to be talked about because the only victims of sexualizations are females, and they are unable to own up to the very term of sexual liberation simply because that only one gender is subjected towards all these standards. If it's true that it's bad, that sexualization is an evil, then we think in the same similar situation when males are also subjected towards the same standards in which what they subject female towards, we think that there is some form of realization that is more reasonably more likely to exist. Why do we say so? Because let's analyze the logic here, right? They told us sexualization is bad. If you get sexualized, you don't like it. You would sexualize other individuals even more. What is the logic behind it, right? Because if we substitute sexualization for murder, murder is something that is bad also. If you had an experience of murder before, you would obviously not inflict the same harm towards other individuals also. Similarly, if you don't want to be sexualized, that you are not included in the very criteria of what it means to be beautiful, then it's more reasonable for a male to have some sort of realization that sexualization is something that is bad. Sure, more objectification may happen, but what is the extent? Because those objectification already exist under status quo, and it's only exclusive towards one gender, and there is insufficient efforts towards countering those sorts of objectification that currently exist. We think it's much more strategic for you to place these individuals who are actively placing harm upon other individuals in the same shoes of their victims in order for them to experience the very same experience, in order for them to not sexualize even more. But secondly, right, this is the main idea in which they did not respond on, which is the idea of evolution and the idea of the expansion of discourse, right? Why do we say so? That discourse can never actually happen, the point in which women do not actually feel empowered when they are sexualized, but the point in which your counterpart, your male counterpart, is also subjected towards the same sort of standards, that is not necessarily a bad thing being sexualized, right? It's up to interpretation, because every individual experiences the same thing. If you feel you're up for it, then you're up for it. If you feel that you're not up for it, then it's not up for it, right? It's more likely for females to actually feel empowered, the point in which both genders are actually sexualized. But here's the exclusive thing that is only exclusive towards side government, is that the discourse of the preferences of sexualization can never actually happen, the point in which only one gender is subjected towards sexualization. But when the preferences does not cover the main preferences of every single spectrum of identity in society, inclusive of both genders, it is more likely for a vast majority of individuals to actually actively voice out their opinions and actively make an active stance upon why is my preference not included in those sorts of preferences that defines what does it mean to be beautiful. Because the point in which sexualization happens, and there are a lot of individuals who are not included in the discourse of sexualization because that very skill is limited, it is more likely for individuals to actually join a discourse, it is more likely for individuals to actually form a community to expand all these sorts of discourse. We can see it from historical events when celebrities were extremely slim last time, but we are more open to much more thicker and much more bigger size celebrities in status quo. It is a product of sexualization, and those discourse can only happen when you have an active effort towards it. Considering that the effort is insufficient and the progress is slow in status quo, it's more strategic for you to take a new form of effort, and that effort is through this policy. Thank you.
Balik.